In this episode, we introduce the configuration stability principle to discuss the purpose of consciousness. Welcome to the second season of the Bottom Turtle Podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Bottom Turtle Podcast. I'm Dr. Shannon Ray, and we're joined by our co-host, Oyani Onimiya. How you doing, Oyani?
I'm doing okay, Shannon. What's up, though? Welcome to Season 2, guys. It's been a somewhat long-ish break.
It's life, man. What are you gonna do?
Yeah, I know, right? What are you gonna do?
A lot of crazy stuff. A lot of changes in both of our lives recently, and so we just had to prioritize what we can get done. And now we're back. Yeah. Hopefully, with much anticipation by our audience.
Yeah, and we have a whole bunch of different things we want to talk about this season. So we're hoping we can get through all of it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Hey, Oyani, have I told you that you remember in the last season when I went on the philosophy of science subreddit and then ended up talking to that dude, Reasonable Fideist? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Have I told you that I've been I became friends with that guy?
Oh yeah. You told me about that. We talked about that last time we hung out. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah.
It is, man. It's the type of stuff that really lets you appreciate our current era with social media and being connected on the internet. Is you can literally just spark friendships with random people. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where they are or anything. You can just become good friends with somebody randomly. Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that with all the crazy, more insane, I should say, ideas out there that exist on the internet or things we use it for, I guess. Being able to just connect with someone on the other side of the planet over a shared interest is one of the beauties of, where we are right now as a species.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
It's great.
And the more people use it for that purpose as opposed to going on to spew their self-righteousness or whatever it is, whatever emotion. Yeah, it gets them through the day at the expense of their understanding of reality, whatever it is, that instead of doing that, connecting with people. That's why I really like my Instagram account, because I mostly post martial arts stuff, and there's so many people on there that because of all of our shared interests, they start liking your video, you start liking them, and then you start commenting back and forth, and eventually you're just friends with these people, and you're they're encouraging you, you're encouraging them, and that's really what I use my social media for. I don't use it for much else.
Yeah, and I think that talking about social media, it's so interesting that you can actually just curate your social media how you want if you are someone who's aware enough, about, the things you want to see, or like we said in the last episode, the neighborhoods you want to live in. Do you want to live in the neighborhood of these hateful content, or are you someone who wants to just get wholesome content about boxing and martial arts? Well, there you go.
Yeah, there you go.
That.
It's there,
and I think that's the beauty of where we are now. And it's easy to see all of the problems that we have with using the internet and all that, but there's a whole lot of value there that we get on a day-to-day basis that I feel like we take for granted.
Yeah. And the thing is that Reasonable Fideist guy, he's a existential phenomenologist. The way I would describe this guy is, have you ever seen The Good Place? Chidi on The Good Place, and how obsessed that dude is with ethics and philosophy
and stuff like that. Yeah.
That's he genuinely likes ethics and philosophy that much. He has his favorite philosophers. He likes Kierkegaard and Emmanuel Levinas. And he just send me all this stuff, and we'll just he'll send me some articles to read, and we just read them and then talk about them. This awesome, dude loves philosophy so much, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, shout out to Reasonable Fideist, man. He's one of the first people we connected with on Reddit about our podcast. So it's great to see that you guys are talking more. That's awesome.
Yeah, and he is indeed quite reasonable. Yeah. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. But now it's time to get into the topic of today. This whole season has the air of, we're going to be talking about some heavy subjects, consciousness, God, spirit, things like that. But the whole point, again, to the podcast is to discuss all of these things in terms of information and information processing, and try to make these arguments from physical definitions so that whenever you communicate these ideas to someone, you can start from the physical which is this stable stuff that anyone can verify how it behaves.
I understand.
Yeah, and then make make definitions and reasonable arguments based off of that. And so that's what we're just going to continue doing that in this season, but we're going to be talking about these topics like consciousness, spirits, and gods and things like that. So yeah, and today's episode, we want to focus on, and I got to think of a better name for it. Maybe we can come up with one on the episode today, but I call it the configuration stability principle. Okay. And this principle is going to do all the heavy lifting for this season in the way that the nomentation without representation principle did last season. Mm-hmm. Because the whole point to the nomentation without representation is it connects the conceptual space or the metaphysical space to the physical space by using the metaphors of computation. And the fact that we know that when we are interacting with other people, whenever we are being told a secret, for example, then that's like storing that information on your physical system like a memory card. That's an undeniable fact. Like, good luck arguing against that. And so we're basically just going to use the undeniable fact that as biochemical configurations, we are only pseudo-stable. We're not that stable. And to see what I mean by that, you can compare it to like the stability of a rock. If you put
So no, sorry to cut you off, but before you go too far,
yeah,
can you just start out by breaking down what exactly configuration stability principle is?
Yeah.
What would you say it is?
I would say it is the principle that as biochemical configurations, we are pseudo-stable. Meaning that if you were to, it's funny, that's exactly what we're going into.
That's exactly what you're going
into. But it's good that you made it explicit.
Yeah.
If you were to put a biochemical configuration into a room next to a rock and they just had to sit there, that configuration is going to decay in like a few days if it doesn't get resources. The rock's cool. It's just going to sit there and chill. Yeah. And so it's the fact that we are stable in that we can exist as stable configurations, but we constantly have resources so that we can have a stability on the time frame of a rock. Yeah, so you can maintain the stability on the time frame of a rock. So that principle in itself is the basis of everything we care about as these pseudo-stable configurations. And on top of that, because we're not as stable as rocks, like we're not frozen like rocks, we're like these fluid objects, we're like fluid beings that have this capacity for all these fluctuations within our system. And it's through those fluctuations that give us the capacity for different states of being. And so that's essentially what it is. It's like, okay, well, let's try to imagine going back to early primordial biochemical configurations, early primordial beings, and then let's try to imagine the process of evolving into these more complex beings through the competition of resources and then like using one's memory to gain an advantage to compete for resources. Yep. And then maintain stability of configuration. Yeah. Basically that's what it is.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because that push to find resources to keep ourselves stable is something that, is almost innate to us now. Like you don't want to just sit there and just be hungry and just sit there like a rock. Of course, you are going to be propelled to go find resources to keep yourself staying stable.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think one of the key things about this episode that we're trying to kind of illustrate here is the idea that these systems you have to be aware of this. Mm-hmm. This is not something that you can just leave to, I don't know, your body to figure it out. Like, for example, and a good example would be, you are in a room next to a rock. You're starting to get hungry. The rock is just chilling.
Yep.
But at that point, because of how advanced we have gotten as a species, how much evolution we've gone through, you can pick and choose, what do I want to eat?
Yeah.
Is this the good thing for my system right now? Okay, I'm lactose intolerant. I'm not going to go down a whole gallon of milk.
Yep.
That's not keeping my system stable.
Yep.
So these high level processing is one of the things that just makes it so vastly different from all of these other configurations.
Yeah. And it's also important to your point that the different states of beings are just different configurations. Like going back to the previous season, that's why it's good we already established this. No mentation without representation. The configuration of being happy is not the same thing as the configuration of being sad. And so whenever we're talking about the stability of configurations, like you can focus on the idea of death. All right, well, we all know for a fact that if I walk off a cliff, or if I don't eat anything, then eventually I'll die of starvation, and then my body will decay, and I'll literally decay into random noise. It'll just be like random noise. We always focus on that, but really it comes down to all of your states of being. Every state of being, whether you're happy, whether you're sad, whether you're angry, those are all different configurations. And so this stability goes beyond just staying alive. It goes to everything that is the experience you have while existing. What different states of being do you want to make stable? Yeah. And that is, as information processors, that's really the focus of everything we do. It's like, all right, I'm in this state. I want to get to that state. What is the algorithm to go from one state to the other? And then what do I have to do to maintain that configuration, that state of being? Yeah.
And especially if it's a configuration that I'm hoping that you're picking a configuration that benefits the whole.
Yes. Yeah.
And which is another thing that's also important to think about, because like we had talked about in the outline, is imagine that we're comprised of all these systems.
Yep.
Within a larger system.
Yep.
And we have to, based off of, where we are as a species, the kind of high level processing that our computers, quote unquote, are doing, we're able to, pick and choose how we want to balance the system.
Yep.
And it's important that you actually even know that the system is there. It is your responsibility. Yep. To keep it balanced. Like you can't outsource this to anybody else or just not pay attention to it. It is your 100% responsibility to move yourself from one state to the other state, one configuration to the other configuration, to keep yourself stable. All of that is on you, bro.
Yeah.
And I cannot help you.
Yep.
And you have to be aware of it.
Yeah. And I think that this is a good point to transition to the idea of, like, it's funny because the whole reason why we're doing the podcast is kind of this whole information theoretic point of view of reality. And in the first season, in the first episode, like, we started focusing on the question, what is reality? But for me, at least, this was not the beginning of this information theoretic point of view. The beginning was actually this conversation. It was actually the ideas of consciousness that was the beginning for me for going down this rabbit hole of seeing everything in terms of information. And more specifically, it was trying to understand how different biochemical beings use memory to gain an advantage to remain stable. That was actually the beginning of all of it for me. And what it was is, originally I was having these conversations with my friend Ross Thompson, and we were having these conversations about consciousness, and I remember trying to imagine these biochemical configurations gaining an advantage from memory. And my original conceptualization was to assume the existence of a brain. Okay. And so the problem with that is, how do you describe a biochemical configuration gaining an advantage from memory prior to the evolution of brains? And that may sound like a trivial problem, but that was actually the impetus that got me to thinking of information in terms of in this global point of view, because you then have to start asking, okay, well, if I'm trying to have a general understanding of how things evolve to use memory to gain an advantage to maintain stability, you have to start looking at what is memory as a whole, if we're not assuming that there's like some sort of central memory hub, like a brain, where information is gathered and processed in the brain. And what you have to start understanding is that, every part of the system of a biochemical configuration, every part of it has memory. And so this was kind of brought me down the hole of, okay, well, what is memory and what is information? And the conclusion I came to was information is like the bookkeeping of all energy and matter in the universe. And by bookkeeping, I mean it is the not the categorization, but the tracking.
Almost.
It's the what?
The archivist.
Yes. It's the tracking of all of the energy and matter, where it's located, and what state it's in. And that was the first like conceptualization of the degree of freedom soup. It's like this global understanding of what information is. And then once you realize that every part of a biochemical configuration has information, then you can start assuming that each part of the system has memory that can affect the future state of the system.
Yep. And they're going to use that memory to their advantage to, gain more resources or put themselves in an advantageous position and things like that.
Yep. And so it is that globalization of the idea of memory that allows you to conceptualize these configurations gaining an advantage without assuming the existence of a brain, so then brains can evolve with this idea of an advantage being gained. And so the way that I started conceptualizing this is I tried to go back. I call them like primordial beings, and I just tried to imagine some celled like beings. So the way I just imagine is like just imagine an oval. And say that oval represents like a membrane. And then within that oval, there are like 3 circles, and those 3 circles are like constituent beings that make up
the oval.
And so the oval with all the parts inside of it make up the being as a whole. And then I just try to imagine that each one of the circles has a resource that it needs to survive. Be stable, to survive. Yeah. And because they all have memory of their previous state, you can imagine that each circle within the oval has the capacity to affect the future state of the system. But what you can imagine is if one of the circles has undue influence over the system, such that it moves the system as a whole, such that it gets its resource and the other ones don't get their resource, then eventually, since the others didn't get their resource, then they die, and then the system as a whole dies. And so there has to be some sort of process that allows all of the circles to be able to use their memory such that they all get their resource so that the system as a whole gains an advantage. Otherwise, the thing will, not get the resource it needs, and then it won't be stable and it'll decay.
Because the oval itself needs, to put this in a more basic way, the oval itself needs all 3 of them to get along to survive. Yeah, exactly. The oval itself needs all 3 of them to get along to survive, and that's just the game they're playing. Yep. So I can imagine that if one part of this oval, like one of those 3 systems in there, decides to just pursue its resources, I don't give a damn what everybody else's needs or whatever. That system is not going to live for very long.
It's not going to be stable.
It's really not. Especially when we have already established that the oval itself needs all 3 of them to get along.
Yeah, it needs all 3 of them to maintain its stability. And so one thing that I think that makes sense is you can imagine 3 different types of these primordial biochemical configurations. You can imagine type 1, which just moves randomly. So type 1 doesn't actually use any memory to determine its future action. It's just a random walk. And if it randomly runs into a resource, then it survives. Then you have type 2, and you can imagine that one as being one that uses its past memory to affect its future action, but it always does it to put itself in a worse position. And that would be akin to this thing where like one of the circles gets this undue control over the system, and then it just moves to gain its own advantage, but in doing so, killing the others. So that would be like one that has memory, and it uses the memory to affect future behavior, but it always puts itself in a worse position. And then you have one biochemical configuration that uses memory to affect future behavior, but it gains an advantage over the random walk. So, you don't know how much advantage it gains. It just gains some advantage that makes it perform better than a random walk when trying to gather resources to maintain a stable configuration.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if I should be doing this, but when we talk about this, I can only like picture people in my head. I can picture like 3 different kinds of people. And let's say all 3 people need food to survive. These 3 people just walking in, they need food. The first one is starving, but just like the other 2. But he chooses to just keep walking until he runs into food. I'm just going to keep walking until I just stumble into a pot of beans, and that's great. We all know it might happen. You could, it's
it would be like,
but
it would actually be like, imagine going to a grocery store and knowing you need an item, but instead of looking at the aisles and how they're labeled to make a path to kind of inform where you're going to look to find the item, you just randomly just start checking random aisles and just hoping that you run into it. Yeah.
Or and that's one person, and then we have the other person who is just hell bent on knows, you know what, this is what I need for my survival. This is the food I need. Maybe, I'm going, for example, I'm going on a hike. I need to, eat, foods that will store energy, but this person decides, you know what, I'm just drink 3 bottles of soda and go. That's a whole other person. Yeah, of course, you're using your memory, but you're using it to put yourself in a worse position. And then we have the third person who's able to use past experience. Like, you know what, last time I went on a hike, I drank 3 bottles of soda, and that didn't work out too well for me. So this time around, I'm gonna have a granola bar and some, And that's kind of how I picture it in my head when we talk about this.
That's a good way of looking at it. I think it makes it less abstract and it makes it a little more concrete.
More.
Yeah. So you have to imagine that given these 3 different types of biochemical configurations, the third type, the one that gains an advantage from its past memory, it's going to outperform the other 2. Like the other 2.
Eventually, the other 2. The first one is probably going to die of hunger.
The second one's going to kill itself.
Die on the hike.
The other one's going to kill itself. It's going to walk off a cliff. So then you're pretty much left with, after a while, you're just left with this third type. And now the third types have to compete with each other for resources. And so the interesting thing about it is, through evolution, we know that you get more complex systems from less complex systems. So as these type 3 compete for resources, they start to evolve and their configurations start becoming more complicated. And
the games become more complicated. The games they're all playing become more complicated. So you have to compete better to win.
And so
you have to know better strategy.
Exactly. So then I think that the evolutionary process, these information processing games for resources, they start selecting for systems that can wire itself. So you have to imagine that these circles are having these internal interactions, which result in different states of being or different ways of using memory to try to gain an advantage. And so this evolutionary process is going to start selecting for those that start maximizing the memory of all parts of the system so that the system as a whole gains an advantage. And I think that this selection, this competition in this way, this is the reason consciousness emerges. Because as the system becomes more complicated and it starts consuming other resources and it starts growing in size, and now instead of there being 3 circles, there's 20, and now there's 50, and then the type of interaction that these 50 can have become more complicated over time.
Different.
Eventually, if the system can use its past memory and its present information to start making projections about the future, and then it can start using these projections of the future to start saying, okay, if I allow the system to move the way that it's moving, it's going to fall off a cliff. So instead, with my projection of what the future state of the system is going to be, there's this ability to change that trajectory such that it does something else to put itself in a better position. And I think that this is essentially how consciousness emerges through these information processing games, is that it's literally a strategy for maximizing the advantage of memory to gain resources when competing in information processing games to be stable.
Yeah. And I think that just pursuing that stability and keeping the configuration stable is something that any conscious system that's like a main goal. It's like an overarching goal that any conscious system or any aware system has.
Yeah.
And so being able to utilize past experiences and being able to couple information from all the other pieces of the system that's around you is important to keep the system alive. And like I always do, bringing this back to, human beings and how we interact with each other, like we have to start to see the broad picture. We need to be able to compete for resources. But at the same time, we need to do it in such a way that we are aware of all the other systems that make up the whole.
Exactly. That's exactly it. That's the thing, is that as humans, we need to start recognizing that when we're using this analogy of these three circles in the oval, now each circle is a human, and the oval is your society. It's your group.
Yes.
And it's a network of these biochemical configurations, and you are connected to this network. And if a single individual decides, you know what, I'm going to gather all the resources, F the system, F everybody else, that makes the system inherently less stable. And so at the moment, that thing may be gaining an advantage, and it may think it's so smart that it's taking advantage of everybody else. But really what it's doing is it's taking the society that gives it meaning, that gives its life value, that gives it meaning, and it's making that entire thing less stable. So eventually they might be at the top of the hill with all the resources, but then the whole thing collapses from under it, and what is it? It's a type 2 configuration. Good job, you just killed everybody. Congratulations.
You just killed yourself. Yep. And I think it's something that, when we talk about this topic, I always want to keep that in mind, is we don't exist in our own little vacuums, as much as, the world kind of makes it easy for us to curate these bubbles that we live inside. We still interact with everybody. We're all interconnected in such a way.
How did you say it in the first episode? We're all in this shit. If you break it, we're all in it, though.
We're all in it, I'm telling you. And so, we have to just be aware that keeping the configuration stable, advancing it, and making sure that, competition is fair and is moving us forward is so crucial to our survival as a species.
And, I want to coin a phrase. I call just like the base game, the very base game, the principle of stable configuration, the very base game. Can we just continue to exist? F all the higher order games of what is happening. Can we just exist first? I call that the first fundamental game. And I got that phrase from, something in differential geometry called the first fundamental form. And forms are these things, they're called differentials. And I'm not going to get into it. It's more like, imagine you have a curved surface. You have 2 points on this curved surface and they're connected. So you just have a 2 points on a curved surface connected by a line. And so you have like a curved line connecting these 2 points. And from there, you can construct something called a differential from that curve. And from that curve, you can construct the tangent space, and you can construct these metric components. And so whenever in differential geometry, when you're trying to construct the metric components, which tell you everything about the geometry of this curved surface, you construct something called the first fundamental form. And so I like that phrase. I don't want to get into how important that structure is of these differentials and these tangent spaces and then constructing a metric in geometry. I'm not going to get into that, but it's extraordinarily foundational to differential geometry and everything. Okay. So I think that what I think a lot of people forget is they forget that they're playing the first fundamental game. And what happens, especially in today's society, is people are playing these higher level games of like, how many likes can I get on social media? How much can I influence other people with my ideas? Trying to be influential, trying to gain fame, trying to be a trendsetter or whatever it is. And a lot of times they're willing to say and do anything, but they're not focused on the first fundamental game. And so they don't pay attention to whether or not their behavior is destabilizing the system. And I think that our modern society, where everything is so easy and readily available. If you need food, you can just go to the grocery store. You're not worried about whether or not you're going to die from exposure because you don't have shelter. Most people aren't worried about that. Because of that, people, they forget about the first fundamental game. They think they can just start making up and doing whatever they want, and it's not going to affect anything. But you got to remember, eventually, you have to always think, am I making our system less stable by doing this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's obvious that a lot of people have forgotten that, because this is not our day-to-day struggle. Like, your day-to-day struggle doesn't involve
foraging for food.
I'm in my apartment right now. I look out the window. There's shrubbery and woods or whatever. I'm not remotely concerned that lions are going to run out and jump me or whatever, because I know, when they did the urban planning for this area, I'm pretty sure there were no tigers living in there. This is not a concern that we have. So, that whole, let's try to exist problem, it's not at the forefront of our minds all the time, and it's being replaced by, you name it, all kinds of
BS.
shit. Yeah.
And so, as biochemical configurations, everything we do is a matter of trying to rearrange the physical state of the universe to bring a configuration into existence and then try to make it stable. I don't think that there's anything that we do that can't be broken down to just that.
To that, yes. And that was kind of what I was talking to you the other day. I said, we can say it's Legos all the way down, because we're just trying to just make this new configuration. We have a box of Legos and we just stick them together. Okay, can we make this stable? You put it down. Okay, this is not stable. How can we make it stable? That's the game that we're playing.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where once you've conquered the first fundamental game, as a lot of societies, as that we've done, once you conquer that game, you start having to ask, okay, what other games do we play? We can start playing these higher order games, and what games you choose to play and what strategies you use to play them, they tell you about your values. They tell you about your morals and your ethics. What do you value? What objective functions do you try to optimize? And it's one of those things where there are all of these different opinions about what we should value, what we should care about, what states of being we should try to bring into existence.
Preserve or bring into existence.
And so this is just a problem of existing. What do I choose to identify as the self? What structures do I think are so valuable that I will make sacrifices to bring those configurations into existence and then make them stable? And this is at the heart of, I think, a lot of religious questions, a lot of philosophical questions and ethical questions is, what should we, and this is what I think of it as, what should we worship? Because when you identify a configuration that you value so much that you will make sacrifices to bring it into existence and make it stable, you start realizing, like we're saying, who you are, your art, has to do with how you program reality. During an interaction, it depends on how you program reality and how you're programmed by, or not program. It's like how you're programmed by your environment and how you program your environment. And that essence of who you are gets tied to how do you program the universe. And so your spirit, to a degree, can be understood in terms of how you program the universe and how you're programmed by it. That breaks down your spirit, because you can imagine when someone is thinking about, oh, I like it whenever this happened, Oyani usually says this, or whenever I'm having this interaction, Oyani would say this, and that's something that, given this circumstance, Oyani reacts this way. That's associated with him and how what configurations he brings into existence. So you start realizing that what you do, what you choose to bring into existence, what you value, that tells you something about what you identify as a self. What configurations do you worship? What do you make sacrifices for, such that those configurations do you want to preserve?
Yeah, things like that. Yeah, because, and another way to look at this is, I remember when I opened my Instagram account, for example, I opened it because I wanted to, share some of my art, share some of my, design work, and interact with people in the design community and people doing, what I do and things like that. And it's so interesting because, we're stuck in this internet giant marketing bubble where these algorithms are trying to compete for our attentions and things like that. When I go on Instagram, because I have this goal, the goal for why I opened up this account in the first place, the thing that I worship, the thing that I'm willing to make sacrifice for is, my art, things like design. So if you go on Instagram right now and you click on that little search icon, it's so interesting to do that because the algorithm essentially is showing you a picture of who you are in some sense, because it's giving you a picture of all of the things that you've been worshiping lately.
The things you value.
And, and I'm using words like worship and this loosely here, but stay with me. So For someone like me, who my overarching goal when I opened this account was to look at people's art, communicate with people, in art, or people who appreciate art, and that's my goal. If I start to spend a lot of time searching for like cooking videos, for example, all day long, I'm just watching cooking videos on Instagram. Eventually, when you go in that search again, which is almost like a snapshot of, what you're worshiping, what you value, what are the configurations you want to keep stable, what is important to you, it starts to give you that picture. So sometimes when I notice, I'm getting a lot of funny videos, for example, or meme videos or whatever, and I'm watching a lot of those on Instagram, I start to see less and less of the things that matter.
Yeah.
And it takes a whole level of, okay, you know what? Let me reset this.
A conscious recognition of it.
You have to be aware of that.
Yes. That's really well put, man. I like that. Yeah.
You have to be aware of that. And it's something that I constantly pay attention to, because absorbing this content and putting more of it out there is not to say this is better than this and this is worse than this, but it's a picture of who you are, the things that you worship and the configurations that you're willing to preserve.
And it showed your drift. So in the last season, we connect the space of configurations with locations. So, you can imagine being in this configuration or another configuration, and then actually being distance. And so given the set of all configurations you can be in, you can start arranging them such that they can be understood in terms of locations in the space of configurations. And that thing you just described is almost like drifting. As you interact with other things, it changes the data that you're taking in, which changes your configuration, which starts making you drift to other states. And if you're not paying attention to how you're drifting, then you may wake up one day like, where the hell am I? Yeah, what is this place? And then imagine all the work you have to do to get back there, because the thing is these physical systems we have, they are physical systems. You can't just wake up one day and be like, I'm going to be happy, and then suddenly you're happy. You have to do all this. Like, if you drift from a configuration that is a place that you were like, this is a good place. I like being in this place. My family's happy. My friends are happy. I'm pursuing my dreams. This is the place I want to be. Once you start indulging in things that are beyond that, then you start drifting away, and then you actually you have to do all this physical labor, like work in the sense of not just like a colloquial work, but in terms of physics. This is a physical system. It's like, I always like to imagine your body as being, one of those puzzles where there's like a space where like one square is missing, or like a couple squares are missing, and you have to slide, like there's like a picture, and you have to slide around these squares to make this picture come into existence. You can't pick the squares up. So it's like,
so the farther away you go from the picture, the more steps you have to do to get back there.
You can't just imagine the picture to now be in existence, and that actually takes work and effort. And like you said, be aware of where you're drifting. What are you consuming? What data are you consuming? Who are you interacting with? Yeah.
What kind of information, what kind of data you're putting out there, what kind of configurations you're creating, all those things. And then when you zoom out a little bit, you get the opportunity to go, what footprints am I leaving behind in the system as a whole? Like, am I moving the system to a better place, or is this just am I like one of those beings who's just out there gathering resources for myself at the detriment of everybody else in the system? Or am I focused on putting the effort into keeping the system stable and improving the configuration that we currently have and things like that? So I think just being aware is perhaps the biggest thing that's kind of helped me being able to navigate this, because once we started talking about topics like this, it's more physical than you think, I physically feel like that's a bad neighborhood, and you walk in there.
Exactly.
You have to walk yourself out. You're not just going to snap your fingers and appear on the other side of it. You have to walk yourself out.
And being aware is the essence of being conscious, because think about it.
Yes.
Think about a rock rolling down a hill, right? When a rock is rolling down a hill, it's just, there's a gravitational field. There's no force keeping the rock at that position on the hill, so it gets pulled down the hill by the gravitational field. The rock isn't making a decision. It's just being pulled by gravity. That's what it's like to behave in an unaware way, to allow outside influences to just allow you to drift without you being aware of it, without you paying attention to it, you're just like the rock rolling down the hill. But to be aware of what information you're gathering and the drifting, that is to, instead of like if the rock were rolling down the hill, like, you know what? I want to move orthogonal to the downward direction. I want to go right now. And now all of a sudden the rock turned and goes in the other direction. That is applying a force. And that applying a force is the work you're doing on the physical system to maintain it from just rolling down the hill. And
down the hill.
Again, it's this awareness that I think is associated with consciousness, to be aware of what's going on and then use the actual data to influence the future state of the system. If you're not influencing the future state of your system and you're just moving based off of inputs of other than your surrounding, than your environment, you're just not acting in a conscious way.
Or off of impulses or whatever. Yeah. It's
you're not.
And it, like a good way to picture it is picture that oval that we talked about that had those three systems in it. Mm-hmm. So imagine that these three systems have three buttons: food, shit, and sleep.
Yeah.
And
wait,
so
all three of them have the same button, or each circle is their own
they
button?
Have one button each.
Okay.
One button each. One has food, one has sleep, one has shit. And so imagine that these three systems are trying to compete for resources. I want food. I want sleep. I want to take a shit. Now, imagine that you are in control, overall control. You're aware of these three systems. And that's the awareness. You're aware of what they want. You're aware of what they need. But every time the system in there hits that button for food, you just give it food.
Yes.
Oh, food. You give it food. And it's like, wait a minute. Hey, sleep. Hey, come on, sleep. Hey, come on, shit. You're not doing it. You will shit yourself in the worst place possible.
This is exactly it. This is a really good point.
And so that awareness is a good way for you to kind of picture it is, these things have buttons that are pinging.
Yes.
They're just constantly just pinging for shit. And that awareness is how you go, okay, you know what? I gave you food an hour ago. Calm down. I need to
and
sleep
that's the
now.
thing. It's like we're getting at the beginning of the episode, we're talking about how each constituent part of the system, it has memory. It has the capacity to affect the future behavior of the system. And so if you're sitting there getting these signals from your digestive system to eat more food, and it's like, oh, well, I just had more sugary snacks. It is the responsibility of the consciousness to go, oh, well, wait a minute. I can tell right now that eating sugary snacks is equivalent to running off of a cliff. So I see that that's where the system's going. And so instead of indulging in the signal of eating, I'm going to make a sacrifice to not indulge in that signal so that I can put the system in a better state. That's it. That's what we're doing here.
I think that's a great takeaway to kind of take away from the episode is I think the first step is just you have to be aware of your own consciousness. You have to be aware of what that really means. Like, you have to be aware of the strength and the control that you have over the system. There are times where we might have slipped away from the ideal where, we've given one part of the system
way too much control,
more control over the other. But the beauty of being conscious is knowing that, okay, this is what's happening. We're not saying that this is something that's absolutely within your power to fix, but at the very least, you're aware of it, and then you can start to make steps to come out of that bad neighborhood. You can start to make steps to, take more control away from this thing. Like, stop hitting that food button all the time. I'm not going to respond to
exactly.
you. Exactly. Stop hitting the sleep button anytime. That's just not going to respond
and
to
you
that
do
anymore.
it. Yeah.
And,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And you do it with conviction, and it's going to be a process, and you might have to get some help. You might need to talk to someone about it, whatever you need to do. But what we're saying is fundamentally, this is your responsibility. You have to at least be aware that these systems are inside of you trying to gain an advantage. And it's your responsibility to make sure that it's a fair game and everybody is balanced.
Yes, exactly. And it's one of those things where when it comes to which signals you reject and which ones you indulge in, that comes down to your ideals. You have a set of ideals, and you look at all of these different ideals. Like, for instance, you say, I like the God of discipline, for example. And the God of discipline demands that I don't just constantly indulge in these signals. Or I want the God of kindness. So I want to be a kind person. And so you have a model of what kindness is. And so you come up to a circumstance in which there's a signal that you have this opportunity to F somebody over. And you would have gained an advantage from it. Like, say you want a sweet and you could push that person on the ground and take it or whatever. And you get this signal from the system says, hey, you can take that from this person. And instead of just accepting the signal from the part of the system that wants to indulge in taking, you go, what? No, the God of kindness does not, that is not in accordance with the will.
Yeah, which is the idea
Yes,
that I'm
it's
trying
not in
to get
accordance
to.
with the
Yeah.
will of kindness. So I reject that. And so you come up with all these different values, right? So you come up with all these values. Each one of those values are in accordance with an ideal. And so you have this ideal model, this ideal system, and then you use that to inform which signals to reject and which signals to indulge in. And then from that affects your behavior, which affects what you bring into existence, which affects your spirit, which affects when you program when you interact with others and you program reality, what states are you bringing into existence? When I interact with people, am I making them miserable? Or am I making them happy? Or am I indifferent? What do I bring into existence?
Distance.
Yeah.
And it's just important that we definitely pay attention and are more aware of the impact that we have. And like you said, when you start to like curate how you navigate the reality, your impact on the world around you, you start to curate the things that matter to you and your value system and all that. You start to paint this picture of the configuration that makes you happy, the configuration that is most stable. And then you start to want to preserve that. You know what? I love the fact that, my life is this great. I go to work, I come home, I go to the gym. Like, I love this thing that I've created right now. What is the best way to preserve it? It's sure as hell not going into the streets and, doing drugs and being a nuisance. You're obviously not trying to preserve that configuration. Yeah, and
even more importantly, it's like, because of these information processing things that are always trying to play this first fundamental game, bring configurations into existence and make them stable, you then have to look at intergenerational. So, for instance, I'm a scientist. I am a physicist. I, consider myself a bit of a mathematician. I have read far more pure math texts than I would wish to remember because they are the most exhausting thing you can. They are the most exhausting thing to read. Oh my, man! Don't even get into that. But the point is, it's just painful. But the point is that when I come across the articles or the texts or the process to get my degree in physics, it's always uncomfortable. There have been times where I've doubted myself, where I've been struggling, and I've just been like, I can't do this. This is difficult. But even though I'm getting these signals to be like, hey, you know what? Stop this. This is hard. It's painful. Yeah. I value the configuration of the knowledge of science that has been developed by humanity for thousands of years. We've been developing these ideas. And so for these ideas to continue to exist in the future, every generation, someone has to value them enough to sacrifice all that pain and all that struggle to be like, you know what, it's worth it that I store this information. I store this information in this physical system. I contribute to it, and then I pass it on to someone else in the future. And it's when you identify what you value, because the thing is like, I program the universe as a physicist. I'm not a physicist because I got the label or I got the degree. It's because when you look at my works, when you look at my publications, when you look at how I interact with other physicists, if someone isn't a PhD in physics and they're talking to another PhD in physics about quantum information theory, so if you don't have that requisite data in your system that you've built over years, they're going to notice, you're going to say stuff that doesn't make any sense. Yeah. And so it's that sacrifice that is made to rearrange my physical system to store the memory of science, of logical reasoning, of truth. These are the things that I will make sacrifices for. Like I said, I have easily spent over 30,000 hours just sitting at a desk, just reading and doing equations and doing calculations and being frustrated and being like exhausted and like, all right, next day, another 10 hours, bam.
Yep. Absolutely. Yep. And I think, for people who are like creatives, who are really passionate about their work, it's the same struggle. The struggle to bring something into existence, like a configuration that's in your mind. Like, you have this project and these are the goals of the project. This is who it's trying to reach. And you just have to search in the space of ideas to put together this unique configuration that will satisfy all of these goals. And it's not a fun game to play sometimes. It's not an easy game to play. But like you said, if it's up there with your ideals, the things that you value, the things you want to preserve, you are going to ignore everything else and just fight through that fire. Find it. to bring that configuration into existence until it's done. And I think everybody needs to, I guess, take the time to find that.
Exactly. Because what else are we doing other than
rearranging,
processing data to bring configurations into existence and make them stable? So hopefully this makes it clear how the principle of stable configuration principle, we got to come up with a better name for that, but the
configuration stability
the configuration stability principle. Like you can, hopefully through these conversations, it's obvious how this thing is just at the foundation of everything we care about and what we do.
Everything we do.
It's just at the, it's at the core
and
of it.
I think the takeaway is just be aware of it. I think that's where everyone should start. It's tough to kind of step outside of yourself and really, really look at, what are my values? What are the things that matter to me? What configurations have I been trying to preserve or bring to existence all these years? Start by just being aware.
What do I identify as the self? Because when you what you identify as the self, that determines which configurations you want to worship. What do you want to make sacrifices for? When you identify as the self, it's what do you want to preserve? What will I make sacrifices for to make this thing be stable? And like you're saying, everyone needs to find out what that is, because you're an information processor. There's nothing else to do. Find a game and play it.
Find a game and play it. Yeah, you are in control of this. Don't give up that agency because it feels like everything is just happening so fast, but you are in control of it. Just figure out what your ideals are, the things that matter to you, the configurations you want to preserve, the configurations you want to create, improve, whatever it is. It's all up to you, man. I don't know what else to say, guys, but
I'll say one more thing.
Yeah.
And I guess we should probably go after this, but it's the,
all right, go ahead.
In this example of this oval with the circles representing constituent parts, I view this system that's talking, the thing that says I am Shannon, that is the consciousness subsystem, or the consciousness spirit. Just as you have a digestive system that can send signals that affects the behavior of the system, you have a reproductive system, and these systems can interact in a way to make more complicated systems that can attempt to affect the behavior of the system. The consciousness spirit, or the consciousness subsystem, it also has like an influence on how the system behaves. It's just one subsystem within the larger system that has a job. It has a job, and its job, I think, is to, it came into existence to maximize the advantage of memory, to put the system in a better position. And ultimately, it has gained so much control over the system that it seems like you have your subconscious that can affect the system. Like obviously the consciousness doesn't completely control how the system behaves. Otherwise we wouldn't have psychology and religion and all these things that are designed to help people control their system.
Tap into the subconscious.
So the consciousness spirit doesn't have full control, but it has a crap ton of it. It has so much control over the system that it has the responsibility to determine what to value. What does it mean to be in a better position? What signals to reject? I mean, I think that's the reason why it came into existence. That's why it was born from the system. Its purpose is to identify what is the advantage and what things can it do to give it an advantage to put itself in a better position, to put the system in a better position. Yeah. And that's largely determined also by what the consciousness spirit identifies as the thing it has been given responsibility to preserve.
So I think we could probably end it right there.
Man, I'm glad that turned out.
I'm glad
that was awesome, man. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'm glad that we got together and put this episode together. It's been a minute. We've had a whole bunch of changes in the past couple of months, but we're back at it, guys. I hope you guys are gonna enjoy what we got this season, but I'm hoping that we can get into more practical applications of a lot of the ideas that we've been talking about in the first season, and just kind of really get down into like the murk of things like spirits and these spirits, and really break down what these different configurations mean, and how we all interact, and what it really means to be aware of the system that we're stuck in and trying to preserve.
Yeah, and I think that this episode was kind of a, like, I don't know, what do you call it when you do like a blast, like it's like a shotgun blast, we're just shooting ideas out, and that's kind of what the first episode was of the first season. It was kind of like, if you listen to it, it goes over a broad survey of things, and then in the subsequent episodes targets more specific things. So
we're
hoping
things,
to go back and better define
and really drill down.
Yeah, like because like the ideas of worship and sacrifice,
spirits.
Yeah, spirits and God. Like we'll have entire episodes dedicated to that.
We're gonna break that down. Yeah, it's gonna be fun, guys.
Anyway, so
but anyway, like always,
guys,
do
the plugs.
Yeah, plugs. Let's go. So as always, guys, if you love the episode, we encourage you to share, like, support,
subscribe.
We are available on Spotify and Apple and everywhere else you listen to your podcast. We are available. But share, like it, tell your friends about it. We really appreciate the support so far, and we hope to see you guys.
And don't forget, if anyone listening wants to ask a question, please go to go to Reddit. We have the Bottom Turtle subreddit that you can go to leave a question, or you can email us at thebottomturtlepodcast at gmail.com.
Or you can just leave a comment in the review on the app, and we'll always check it out.
Please.
Yeah, just any way you can reach us, we will respond. Instagram, Facebook.
Because currently we're not getting a crap ton of questions, so I can guarantee if you ask a question, we're gonna answer it.
Oh, we will answer
it for sure. Yeah. And so please, if you want to interact with us and just kind of get more involved, we would love to interact with you guys. Like when this is genuine, like I really am glad that I've built a relationship with Reasonable Fideus. He is an awesome dude, and I just want to use the connectivity of the internet to really build relationships with people that we wouldn't be able to otherwise.
Absolutely. Yeah, but on that note, guys,
stay turtling, my friends.
Like we always say. And catch you guys next time.
Peace.